for a tomato lover. It's a celebration of like summer tomatoes. Hey friends, I hope your week is off to a great start. Today I'm going to be trying Andy Baraghani's recipe for a tomato galette. This recipe is from last month's issue of Bon Appetit, and since it was published, I've been seeing pictures of this galette all over my Instagram. And if you follow me on Instagram, you know that I've been enjoying heirloom tomatoes all summer long. So before they go out of season in the fall, I wanted to be sure to try this recipe out for all of you. So I do Bon Appetit recipe tests every Wednesday. If you like this one, please be sure to give me a big thumbs up and click subscribe. Without any further ado, let's see how this goes. As always, I'll leave a link to the recipe and ingredient quantities in the description box below. First up, I'm making my pastry dough because this is going to need to chill in the refrigerator for at least 2 hours. So you all have seen me make pastry quite a lot lately. Recently I did the Pop-Tart video. Before that I made Claire's cherry biscuit cobbler as well as some buttermilk biscuits. So across all of these recipes, the technique is approximately the same. If you have a food processor, you can do that. It makes things faster. I don't have a food processor, so I'm just manually mixing my dry ingredients, chopping the butter into uniform pieces, and then using my pastry cutter to get this to resemble a coarse meal with a few pieces of butter that are about the size of a pea. All right, so I think that this is looking pretty good, so I am ready to move on to the next step. So when making pastry, it's really important that your water is ice cold. So you can see here that I actually have a jug of ice water that I'm measuring out into my measuring cup for the recipe. To that, I'm adding my apple cider vinegar and then just streaming this through to get it evenly incorporated. Now at this point, the flour mixture is super dry. It is not nearly wet enough to become a dough. The recipe did say tablespoon by tablespoon to add additional ice water until it's a shaggy dough. So for me, I found that I needed 3 additional tablespoons of water for this to come together into a dough that I could kind of work with. So you don't want to over knead this, but you do want to ensure that there are no big patches of dry, unincorporated flour. Once it's looking good, wrap it in cling film, press it into a disc, and then you're going to pop this in the refrigerator for at least 2 hours. I ended up letting mine sit in the fridge overnight. Moving on to the filling of the galette. I'm starting by peeling 2 cloves of garlic. If you don't like peeling garlic, you can buy whole cloves of peeled garlic in the refrigerated section. And then once you've got those peeled, I'm just cutting crosswise to make little garlic coins. You could also slice vertically if you wanted kind of oval strips. Then I'm just popping that into my bowl where I'm going to be adding all of the tomatoes. Whenever I'm slicing tomatoes, I like to use a serrated knife. I think it does a better job not smushing the tomato and it keeps it all intact. So you need 1.5 pounds of tomatoes in total, sliced to 1/4 inch thick. Once the tomatoes are all sliced, you can add them to the bowl with your garlic, and then we're going to season with kosher salt. In retrospect, I should have salted as I was adding the tomatoes to the bowl, and I think it would have been easier to get an even application, and I wouldn't have had to toss so much with my hands. So the salt is doing 2 things for us. First, it's flavoring the tomatoes a little bit. Second, it's pulling out some of the excess moisture so that the galette doesn't get soggy. After 5 minutes, remove the tomatoes to some paper towel and set those aside until assembly. Next, I'm moving on to freshly shaving some cheddar cheese. I am using a 2-year aged cheddar because I like the taste of it, but you could certainly use Asiago or Gouda or something else. All right, now it is assembly time. So I've got my disc of dough. I let it sit at room temperature for just about 2 to 3 minutes prior to rolling because it had been in the refrigerator overnight. So the methodology here is a little bit different than what I'm accustomed to. Andy said to roll it out on a piece of parchment paper. It was a little bit challenging because the parchment paper and the dough wanted to get away from me. However, it is super important to do this because then you can just slide the dough right onto your baking tray. So make sure you do roll it out on the parchment paper. That actually is super important. Don't worry if the edges of the dough are a little bit uneven and craggy. That actually makes the galette look more rustic and nice for the finished product. When adding the toppings to the galette, you want to leave about 1.5 inch border all the way around the perimeter because we're going to fold that over the top. So I've got my cheese down as a base, and then I am just one by one putting the tomatoes on, trying to fan them out and make it look nice, trying to think through what the presentation looks like. So I only had 2 colors of tomatoes, so I was trying to not have the green ones too close together. If you had more colors of tomatoes, this would probably be a really fun kind of artistic project. Once you've got all your toppings down, you can go ahead and start folding the crust up. So this is super easy and not fussy at all. Where the crust overlaps, just give it a little press and that will help it stick together. For the egg wash, I'm just using 1 whisked egg. If you didn't want to use an egg for this, you could use buttermilk or just whole milk, really anything to brush onto the surface of the dough to help it caramelize a little bit and give it a little bit of shine. That's all that the egg wash is doing for us. Lastly, I'm seasoning with fresh cracked black pepper and a little bit of flaky sea salt. With all of this set, you can go ahead and slide this into your freezer for 10 minutes prior to baking. After 10 minutes of freezing, you're ready to transfer this to a baking tray, and we're gonna pop this in our preheated oven, and you're gonna rotate it halfway through the baking process just to ensure everything's even. Just before the galette finishes in the oven, you can go ahead and freshly chop a tablespoon of chives, and this is gonna be just for finishing over the top. With the galette out of the oven, I'm ready to add just the finishing touches. So sprinkling the freshly chopped chives and zesting half of a lemon over the top. The galette baked for a full 65 minutes, and I let it cool for about 5 minutes on the baking tray prior to removing it to cut. But this is what the finished product looks like. So I've got a slice of it here. It's nice and golden brown on the bottom. It feels really crispy in my hand, so I am super excited to give this a taste. Let's see. The pastry crust is super, super flaky. It's really tender and buttery. The tomatoes are so delicious. They kind of have that texture still of a raw sliced tomato where there's a little bit of a bite to it where it does have some structure, but the flavor is more like a cooked tomato, obviously, since it's cooked. So it's a really nice, kind of unexpected eating experience there. I really like this a lot. So I am really happy with this galette. I think that the flavor and the appearance of it are outstanding. Ingredients were all things that I typically keep on hand, so this is super low risk. I would definitely recommend that you give this a try before summer's over. So I really hope you enjoyed this week's video. If you did, please be sure to give me a big thumbs up and click subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.